started our classes with Hail Marys every morning. Once a week, the Jewish kids were excused for an hour for their religious classes. The Catholic children had classes twice a week for an hour. So I was left with an extra hour, and my parents felt that I should know about all religions. So I used to go to the Jewish class on Tuesdays and to the Catholic class on Thursdays. My friends were both Catholic and Jewish. And I kept hearing all these things in my home. All of a sudden, there were people coming and going and spending the night, and it was all hush-hush. And I'd come into the room, and my parents would be quiet and make signs. And then the next morning, these people were gone, and pretty soon somebody else. Well, those were Jewish German immigrants running from Germany. This started in approximately, I would say, 1937. I was 7 years old. I still didn't understand. I knew my parents kept talking about, why aren't they happy in Poland? They've just come from a country where there's no food, no money, no coffee. We're offering them everything. And all they talked about was that Germany was the best country in the world. But I still did not quite understand. Then I was in the 3rd grade, and it looked like we were going to go to war with Germany. We had no army. I mean, we had artillery. We had the foot soldiers. We had the Mounties. We had one airplane. So all the kids, honestly, a true Polish story, all the kids brought nickels and dimes to school to build airplanes. Well, a little bit, this was like May 1938, 39. We moved out into the country, and come September, we were at war and we were invaded and conquered. And then I found out what it was like to be under German rule. Scary? Yes. Different. The first thing they did is confiscated all the businesses, Jewish and Catholic alike. They took our homes, they gave them to German transportees, took farms, gave them to the Germans, and there were truckloads daily of Jews and non-Jews being shipped off to labor camps. Are you familiar with Dachau concentration camp? Okay, that was one of the first steps. Most professional men in the city were removed immediately. So there was no leadership left. Half of our home was taken away and a Polish Catholic family moved into it. By Polish and European standards in those days, a large home was 4 rooms, okay? So they took 2 of them. So we had 2 families. My grandparents had come, they were living with us. So there were 5 of us in 2 rooms. There was no heat, so we got down to 1 room. So we had basically beds and a table and a little kitchen area, but things were still okay. Then that May, they kept rounding up people, beating the Jews on the streets. We were supposed to wear the yellow stars. We were put on food rations and not allowed to attend school. So I did not wear the Jewish star. I didn't look very Jewish. I had auburn hair and a pug nose, and I passed. Jews were not allowed to walk on sidewalks. They had to walk in the middle of the street. There were very few cars. These were villages, small towns, so it was mostly horse and buggy. And they had to walk in the middle with the animals. I passed. I walked on the sidewalks. Not because I was ashamed that I was a Jew, but because this was a means of survival for my family. I'd be the one who could go places, get things, not be beaten up, and bring it home. 1/4 pound of sugar, a piece of, just a chunk of butter, maybe a jug of milk from the neighbors. And this went on. We managed okay. We were selling things off. My parents were selling off personal possessions because it was black market time and you didn't work, you had no income. Then they would round people up. They would beat them kick the Jews and take them for the filthiest work they could find. Basically, it wasn't a job. It was just a demeaning way of treating people. They'd have them stand in the street and sweep out the horse manure. Then they'd have them move it to another pile and start over again. In the meantime, if a Jewish man had a beard and side curls and all that, then he was usually beaten within inches of dying. But life was still passable. We managed. Then they had a big roundup, and they took all the able-bodied men, all the educated men off. My father was amongst them. I was not yet 11. And they were shipped off to a labor camp. We received a letter from him. There was a big city in Poland called Posen. They had a labor camp. They had 5 camps there. My dad went to work. They wanted him to be one of the policemen. He did not want to police his own people. The main reason for this, I best explain. My parents had upper level education. They were multilingual. My dad spoke French, fluent French, Polish, Russian, German, and Yiddish. So they liked to utilize people from that echelon as their servants because it brought some credits to what they were doing. If this person accepted it, then of course the others would follow. Well, my father refused, and so they put him into a hospital to work as an orderly. My mother and my grandparents and I were rounded up about 4 or 5 months later. In the middle of the night, we were allowed to grab a knapsack and take him to the village church. We sat there for 24 hours. We were not allowed out of the compound. We could see our friends and neighbors and farmers looting our homes. Some of them stood there jeering at us. And we waited and waited. About 4 a.m. the following night, they rounded us all up, and between guns and lines of SS men, we were marched outside the village to a little waiting area. There were cattle trains. We boarded the trains, and for 3 days and 3 nights, there were no windows. There must have been 50 to 75 people in each cattle car. We traveled. They'd pull off to let more important trains go. And then eventually we reached a destination, and we heard voices outside. And we heard Yiddish. Now, I was at a disadvantage. I did not speak Yiddish. I only spoke Polish. But I heard my mother and grandparents get very excited. Before they even opened the doors, there was conversation going back and forth, people yelling from outside and from the inside responses as to where are we, who are we, who are you? We're Jews, you're okay. You are in a large ghetto. We will help you. We will find you homes. So once the doors were opened, there were, believe it or not, no Germans. It was a Jewish state, and they had total control. They policed their own. There were factories. There were homes. So we were all escorted, and the first thing they did is they rounded up all the children, and the elders understood it. I didn't, and many of my friends didn't, because we thought we were being taken away. Well, they had no homes for the families, so they had these places where they took children until they could resettle the family. So I was taken to one of those places. I didn't fit in too well because most of them spoke primarily Yiddish, and I didn't, which made it sound like I was putting on airs. However, I managed. I was there for about 5, 6 weeks, and there was a clean bed. There was food. Every day there was hot porridge in the morning and usually split pea soup in the afternoon. Well, I had never liked porridge, and I couldn't stand split pea soup, so I didn't eat for about a week, 10 days. Got sick, got hungry. After about 3 days of being really ill, I went into the dining hall with humongous long tables, and I smelled that soup. You know, it smelled darn good. I dug into it. I've loved split pea soup ever since. Anyway, then I went to live with my mother and my grandparents. There were about 6 families in one little room. We stayed there for quite a few months. You had to get a job. I wasn't old enough to work. Grandma and Grandpa weren't too old. You didn't get food unless you had a work card and a food ration card if you were working. Somehow or other, my grandpa and my mother managed to get us a room upstairs with an old lady, so we moved after a few weeks because there were, I think, 5 or 6 families in this one room. There was no place to sit, let alone do anything else. And through luck, Grandpa got a job. My mother got a job in a furniture factory, and they managed to get me in. You had to be minimum of 13 to go to work, preferably 16. Well, I was 12. I got on, and I became one of the best furniture refinishers in the country. In exchange for that, I received a bowl of soup at noon, and a food ration card, and clothing rations. Our allowance of food was $1/4 pound of butter a month, I think 1 pound of flour and 1/4 pound of sugar and rotten vegetables. And if there was any meat, it was usually horse meat from sick horses or pork, and that was 1/4 pound a month. And people stood in line and killed for it. Oh yeah, loaf of bread, I think it was once a week. So I learned how to be a really good gutter sniper. Hey, these gangs have nothing over what I went through, believe you me. We had our own gangs, we had our own survival team. We lived in the ghetto for a number of years. They started having, I'm making this very concise because there is a short period of time, so I just want to give you a background of what happens to people. Anyway, they kept having roundups and transports out of the ghetto. One day, they came and I was hidden with 2 other youngsters in an attic. And we escaped. However, they did take my grandmother and my grandfather, and they went directly to an extermination camp. Never heard from them again. My mother and I were left alone. We lived in the same place for probably another few months, and it was middle of the winter, and we worked like 4 miles away. It was walking distance, and you had to walk through all these German checkpoints. And by luck, we found a tiny little room. It was probably 6 by 8, across the street from the factory. No floor, no heat, just a stove. We had like a 3/4 bed against one wall, a stove, a little round table, a dresser, but very few clothes. That was it. 2 people could be in there. So we'd get up in the morning and go to work, and then we'd go home. And they were visiting with other neighbors and friends. I became friendly with a girl who lived upstairs. She got ill. We didn't know what was wrong, and then eventually she died of TB of the bones. It was excruciating. Her name was Esther. Life continued. I'd go across the German intersections. My mother was ill. She wasn't well. And we'd get a ration of potatoes or kohlrabi, like in 20-pound bags. I'd sling it over my shoulder and walk 2 miles with it in all kinds of weather and bring it home, but we had food. So that was kind of good. Life in the ghetto continued at that pace until they started removing us daily. They had these roundups, and rumors started flying that people were being shipped off to extermination camps. We were told that if we give ourselves up, we would go to a labor camp. So among the last transports out of the ghetto, we did. Once we got to the railroad station, it was another picture. Cattle cars, again, shoved aboard, this time probably 200 people to a car. And doors locked behind us, 3 days, 3 nights, no water, no food, dysentery aboard, screaming, a few people died. Next place we stopped, there were Germans with dogs and billy clubs, and everybody was yelling, "Rouse, rouse, get out." And so we all had to jump out of the cars, and they lined up, men on one side, women on the other, marched us up in between these lines of Germans with machine guns and dogs. And I remember to the right this beautiful sign, and the place was full of flowers, and it said Oświęcim, which was Polish for Auschwitz. Welcome to beautiful downtown Oświęcim. We were marched through and separated, and they checked the sick people, the elderly, the children went to one side. We knew that was extermination. The other side, we didn't know where we were going. My mother and I both passed. We were taken through lines, stood at attention for probably 4 to 8 hours a day. They had a count, first thing in the morning and last thing at night. It was a camp of over 1 million inmates. And if one person was one count off, you weren't dismissed until it was all over. They'd start all over again. And I'm going to demonstrate to you how we had to stand. That was the perfect distance between each person. You couldn't move, you couldn't sway, you couldn't look to either right or left, or they would shoot you or beat you to death. From there, we were taken through another line, stood in line for hours, were handed something that was supposedly soap, but nobody knew. They shaved all of our body hairs, swabbed some disinfectant on it, which burned terribly, pushed down the line again in front of these humongous overhead like garage doors. And by then, somebody said, "That's the gas chamber." The Germans were behind pushing you, the mass was pushing you. We all got in, we were, probably 500 people, I'm guessing, bodies touching, standing there, and we saw these little things up in the ceiling. And everybody was crying, screaming, praying. Then the thing was turned on and water came out. And we said, "Oh my God, we're going to live." Once we got showered out the other side, then they started throwing clothes at you from a pile. Well, I ended up in a little tiny mini dress that must have belonged to a 5-year-old and a pair of mismatched high-heeled shoes. My mother was handed a pair of men's, like ski underwear, period, and men's shoes. Attention again, marched into the barracks, another room. From there on, we went through this line-up counting. Then my mother and I were separated. I thought I was going to the death chamber again. Instead, I landed in the Hungarian camp. Again, deprivation, dysentery. I almost died. A couple gals helped me, took charge of me until I got a little stronger. One more lineup, another transport, Bergen-Belsen. That was somewhat of a bit of heaven because we were the second transport. It was clean. There was fresh straw on the ground for us. So we'd march and take our showers. By then it was winter, very, very cold, but there were 7 of us banded together. We stayed very clean. Then they started coming in and doing selection for labor camps. Now, Bergen was not an extermination camp. You just died. My friends and I were selected. We went to Magdeburg. Worked in a factory. I worked in an SS kitchen. They took chest x-rays. I was diagnosed with TB. Back to Bergen-Belsen. In Bergen-Belsen, by then, typhoid, you name it, everything was rampant. People were dying. I was there. I don't remember much. I was unconscious much of the time. I remember sleeping next to a woman, and then all of a sudden I couldn't shove her anymore, and I realized she was dead, and in my subconscious state, semi-conscious, I said, "Oh my God, now I can't move," and I sprawled myself out on top of her. There was nobody to remove the bodies. I think about 3-4 days later, someone came and pulled me off and yanked her out. I heard voices. I heard people talking around me saying that the Germans had left. And everybody was running out of the barracks, and I could not. I couldn't stand up. I couldn't sit up. I crawled. I pulled myself, just clawed my way on my belly with my hands through the door, and then onto the dirt out there. And I saw water, and I kept crawling and crawling till I got to this little faucet and got a drink of water and lay down in the dirt, and everybody was crying and screaming. And I don't know how I got back to where I'd been, but I passed out. Next thing I knew, there was English around me, and they were trying to clean me up and give me some food, and I kept floating in and out. Then we got good food, and dysentery started. We got K rations. So I went totally under. I was in a raging fever. I had typhus. And next thing, I am on this stretcher, and of course I knew that I was being taken to the gas chamber. I'd forgotten I'd been liberated. So I started crying and screaming that I was all right, I was healthy, there was nothing wrong with me. Just give me some Arbeit, work. And these hands were holding me down, saying, it's okay, it's all right. You are ill, you're going to a hospital. And I kept screaming, no, 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 no. Well, they got me in, and I float in and out of consciousness. Then, after about 4 or 5 days in this station, I was transferred to a Red Cross hospital and put in a TB ward for the terminally ill and dying. And one day I woke up and there was the same smiling face. That's the first time I'd seen the same face in about a week. And the gal smiled back at me. I fell asleep, woke up, and she was still there. Her name was Sophie. She was a Polish Catholic who had lost her whole family, seen her mother raped and murdered in front of her eyes, and her 1-year-old baby was killed in front of her eyes. So was her husband. We became very close friends. They moved her out of the ward, and they wouldn't move me. They were sure I was dying. And she kept talking to everybody, saying that I was okay. At her insistence, I managed to get another set of chest x-rays. Lo and behold, I had no TB. So I was moved into a room with her, and we shared this room. She helped me to learn how to walk again. She would bring me extra food. And then about 2 months after we'd been there, we found out about a transport going to Sweden. She got on. I was told I couldn't go because I was a child. I had about 6 months of English classes when I was 10 years old, and I remembered enough to say, Doctor, me go Sweden, please. So he started yakking away in English. So, me no understand. So he brought in a translator, and I was informed that children were not allowed to go to Sweden. I said, but I'm not a child. Doctor wondered how old I was. I said 15, and he almost fell apart on the spot. I weighed 55 pounds. I was probably 4 feet 10, no hair, no development of any kind. Anyway, I did go to Sweden. I stayed there for 6 weeks in a camp. Then a Swedish family took me, and wonderful people gave me a home. I found my uncle in Portland, Oregon. He got papers for me. I was on the first ship out of Europe, SS Stavanger Fjord, out of Norway. And I landed in New York just prior to Christmas 1945. Came to Portland, started high school, graduated Grant High School in 2.5 years. I was college bound, but I was madly in love with my husband, and he was an older man. He was 23. So we got married, had 4 daughters, had a wonderful life. He died 7 years ago, and I went into real estate. I used to do interior and floral design before that, just for a change of pace, and I decided it's time to quit hiding. It's time to remember. This has not been an easy road for me. I would have much preferred being a very secure, safe American with my daughters and my son-in-laws and my grandchildren. Life has been very, very secure. Also an American husband. I was not exposed or lived with the survivors. I really tried to stay away. I know it's funny, you all think I have an accent. They can't even hear an accent in my speech because they have stayed in touch with each other. I am now trying to recapture it. I hope that it's a lesson that you take to heart. Please don't let prejudice in any way enter into your lives. Whether it's handicap, whether it's race, religion, whatever it might be, there is some good in every human being. We are all, if you blindfold us and strip us, we are all exactly the same. We all bleed. And don't you ever forget it. Now, if I've reached even one of you, I feel my mission is accomplished. If you have questions, I'm open to them. Thank you. Any questions? Okay, in a concentration camp, standard fare in the morning, you would bring in a garbage can full of, quote, ersatz coffee, which was artificial coffee, and a small chunk of rye bread, dark flat bread. If you volunteered for that duty and were lucky, you might have gotten a little thicker piece of bread, which my friends and I did. Towards evening, late afternoon, the volunteers would go and bring in another garbage can full of, quote, soup. It was usually dirty water with potato peels, rotten kohlrabi, or whatever else the Germans would not eat. It was pig food. Sometimes they would feed it to the pigs, sometimes they would feed it to the inmates. That was the existence. No other food, ever. Does that help? Yes. No, I was an only child, and in a way I feel very fortunate because I know they would have all died. I mean, that's a terrible thing to say, but my parents were married a year and a half before I was born, so they would have had to be younger than I. All my family, every cousin, every aunt, every uncle, they're all gone. They were all killed. Now, I take it back. I have one uncle in Israel. He and his wife and daughter somehow or other survived the camps. I didn't know about it until after the war. No, I tried. I was told if I threw myself on the ground and had hysterics, that maybe somebody, one of the couple, which was the police, the leaders, would help me and maybe take me to her or bring her to me. So I laid on the ground and cried and screamed, lost consciousness, lost control of myself. And I don't know how long I lay there, but that's when these other gals dragged me in and helped me. And by then, I had to learn how to live again because I just about died in the process. There are times when you can't save anybody else. All you can do is just get yourself killed as well. It's a terrible lesson to learn at 14. Yes? No, I wouldn't even go back to Europe. I've been back to England, I've been in Greece, and I have been to Israel. I've been to South Africa, Mexico, and all over this country, but there's no glory for me in Europe. I'm sorry, too scary. Go ahead. When Germany invaded Poland, could everybody hear the question? How did I find my uncle in Portland? When Germany occupied Poland, my parents sat me down and we had a ritual at least 2-3 times a day. Memorized his address and kept repeating it. Every day of my life, I repeated it. And when I was liberated, I still remembered the address and I went to it.
I have a question. When you were separated from your mother, do you know the criteria why they were moving people from camp to camp? How did you leave Auschwitz?
Yes, it was from lager to lager, not especially camp to camp. The Russian army was encroaching by then, but they were also perpetually separated. You see, if you were in a camp for a week or 2 weeks, you would lose probably 50% of your strength. So if you didn't die in your bunk or fall down dead in between, then they would separate you perpetually. Now, I was not in Birkenau, which was the labor camp. I was in a holding part of Auschwitz, Lager A, which I guess was primarily for extermination or transport out of there to German factories, but they were trying to liquidate Auschwitz at that point and conceal everything that had happened. I have one more comment. Everybody asks me, do I have a tattooed number on my arm? And I have been challenged on that many times. I do not. I was in Lager A, then I was in Lager C, and then I was transported out. Most of us, all of us in Lager C had no tattoos. The Germans were shuffling us around too fast by then. But the average survivor does have a number. However, I still remember my dog tag number from when I was liberated. It was 1925. Yes, I did. I had many opportunities. As a matter of fact, one of my close girlfriends in Poland was German Polish. And her parents and my parents were close friends, and I used to play at her house. I can't hear everything. There was one point, yes, where I could have. Polish Catholic friends of my parents who lived out in the country, who was a station master, offered to adopt me, to take me as their own and hide me. No, other than that, they had lists. Are any of you familiar with the South African apartheid system where you have to be registered? Okay? You can pass, but they've got your number. Every Jew, every Gypsy, every Polish German, every Catholic had a designated slot. We were all registered. So no, you couldn't pass. You could escape. You could try to get out of it. But once you were registered as a Jewish family with a child or 2 children, when they came looking, it was very difficult. It was not an easy thing. And in the camps, there was no way, because you were behind electric fences, dogs, towers, guards. There was just no way of escaping that. Some people tried, they were usually killed in the process. So it was a choice of that. How did you want to die? Did you want to die on the electric fence by being electrocuted? Or did you continue hoping and starving and hoping that liberation was near? I don't know who the brave ones were. I really can't tell you. Sometimes I think it takes more guts to try to live than to commit suicide, even though that's an easy way out, and also a very difficult decision. Yes. I didn't want to leave my parents. I begged them. They had my clothes packed, and we were there for Easter dinner. I still remember it. And I just started crying. Just begged my mother and my father, and I wanted to stay with them. And whether it was my pleading, or whether all of a sudden they could not bring themselves to believe that things would get that bad. You see, civilized people find it very difficult to believe that this is going to happen to me. It's incomprehensible. Can you imagine sitting there right now that someone would occupy this country and that in 2 weeks from now you would be branded because you have red hair or blue eyes or whatever, and that you would be killed for that? So you think, no, it's going to happen to the next guy because he's different. It's not going to happen to me. Our family is Polish. We're probably 15 generations of Poles. We didn't live in a little ghetto, in a little town, in a small Jewish community. They were the other kind. Now this sounds terrible, doesn't it? But we were all the same kind. If I had been Catholic, but my grandmother had been Jewish, the same thing would have happened to me. You see, it went that far back. It was that inbred, the hatred, the beating. And it wasn't just the Jews. The Jews were persecuted in larger numbers, and they tried to exterminate the Jewish people. Whether you believe it's a race or a religion, we will not discuss now. The Gypsies had the same treatment. Russian prisoners of war had the same treatment in the camps. There were many, many groups. However, nobody else was marked with total extermination. If you'd like to stay and ask a few more questions or talk to me, whoever wants to, please do. Whoever wants to leave, will excuse you. Yes. Sleep where? In a camp? Okay, Auschwitz were 3-tiered bunks, probably 15 to 20 people in a, I'm guessing, 10-foot area. There were people above you, people beneath you. You had maybe 10 inches of space to yourself. And if you slept, everybody had to be turned the same way. If you curled your arm, it went over the next person. That's the way I slept for over a year. My nightmares were non-existent until about 15 years ago. You see, I couldn't face it. I forgot Polish. I did a complete number on myself. I forgot how to speak Polish, German, Swedish, everything else, and I really did not have the nightmares. The first nightmare I had, there was a gunpowder factory, fireworks factory that exploded in Portland in the late 1950s, middle of the night, and our house shook. We lived about 5 miles from there, and I don't remember it except my husband told me. By then we had 4 children. And he says, I sat up in our bed and I started screaming, my God, they're bombing us, they're killing our children, they're killing my children, they're going to take us all away, they're going to kill them. I can't let them. And I went running to see the kids. And he says, he led me away, he showed me all of them, said, come on, go back to bed. I didn't remember. Next thing that happened to me at a party, I thought someone slipped me a Mickey. I had 1 drink and I found myself in the camps. Again at another party. It always happened with alcohol. 1 drink, usually, would set me off. I would never remember these incidences. It really didn't start coming out of me till the mid to late 1960s. And it was like a dam opening up very, very slowly. Until now, I still have to do research on dates and times and all of that. I can't tell you minute details. They're buried, they're deep down someplace. I've even considered going into psychotherapy just to see what all we could dig out, but I think I'm doing okay. I'm comfortable with who I am now, and there's no point going for all of that. Did this help you? Did it give you an understanding what can happen?
At this point, you do need to get back to 5th period or get to 5th period class. Those of you that need to sign in, check
science. Your mom's waiting out there, Christina.
Sign in.
What?
Huh?
Sign in where?
There. There they were talking about.
Dumb shit.
Dumbass.
Fuck.
Two? I was gonna walk into that.
Also.
I was looking out there. Probably not on. It's not on.
I
I didn't do it this weekend because I was busy, but I'll do it. I'll do it this weekend.
Take shots.
Sign out. My car's okay, so I just need to get out.
You get signed over there?
Chris, what's my name? Somebody sign me in.
Where in Israel?
That definitely